A story like this does not explode because of one headline. It explodes because the headline is only the surface. Underneath it is a timeline that keeps getting darker the longer you look at it. A missing teenager. A rising music star. A relationship prosecutors say should never have existed. A body discovered months later inside a vehicle tied to the artist. And now, with a major court hearing set for July 21, 2026, the case surrounding David Burke, known publicly as D4vd, is moving from shock and speculation into a stage where prosecutors will have to start showing exactly how they believe this happened. That is why this story has held people the way it has. Not just because of who David is, and not just because Celeste Rivas Hernandez was only 14, but because almost every layer seems to open into another one. There is the criminal case itself. There is the missing person timeline. There are the public interviews David gave years before his arrest, where he described isolation, online life, fictional alter egos, and dark creative themes that people are now re-examining with entirely different eyes. And then there is the internet response, where thousands of people have tried to separate what is evidence, what is pattern, and what is pure projection. Right now, the most important thing to remember is simple. David has pleaded not guilty. Prosecutors are alleging a sequence of events they say they can prove. His defense says the evidence will show he did not murder Celeste and was not the cause of her death. Those are the two positions on a collision course. Everything else, from the viral theories to the old clips being passed around online, sits around that legal core. So before the hearing begins, it is worth laying out what is publicly known, what prosecutors are claiming, what reporting has confirmed, and why this case has become one of the most intensely scrutinized stories on the internet. According to public reporting summarized by ABC 7 Los Angeles and NBC Los Angeles, prosecutors say David and Celeste first met in January 2022, when Celeste was 11 years old. They further allege that a sexual relationship began in November 2023, when she was still underage. That allegation is central to the case because prosecutors are not only pursuing a murder count. They have also charged David with continuous sexual abuse of a child under 14 and unlawful mutilation of human remains, while separate reporting has described additional lewd conduct allegations in the filed case. David has pleaded not guilty to all of it and remains jailed without bail as the case heads toward the preliminary hearing. ABC 7 Los Angeles, https://abc7.com/singer-d4vd-charge-murder-timeline-investigation-death-1/4-year-old/celeste-rivas-hernandez/1890812 NBC Los Angeles. https://www.nbclosangeles.com/investigations/d4vd-celeste-rivas-murder-court-date-status-conference/3905414. To understand why so many people became fixated on David's background, you have to go back to the version of himself he presented in interviews long before any arrest. In multiple public appearances, David described a childhood shaped by strict boundaries, homeschooling, loneliness, gaming, anime, poetry, and long hours online. He spoke about leaving public school, feeling isolated, and watching other kids live the kind of social life he believed he had missed. He described spending huge amounts of time on Discord, Fortnite, and other online spaces, talking with people he mostly knew through a screen. He also talked about creating fictional characters, building alter egos, and writing stories inspired by the people around him. Those comments are not proof of criminal conduct. But after his arrest, they became part of the public conversation because they offered a rare record of how David chose to describe his own inner world before any of this became a case. ABC 7 Los Angeles, https://abc7com/post/is DVD singer arrested death-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez started video game streamer // That background matters for another reason. David did not come up through a traditional industry path. He has said his early ambitions were built around gaming and YouTube before music took over. In his own telling, the shift happened almost by accident. He wanted to make gaming content, ran into copyright issues, and then started recording his own songs. That eventually led to the viral breakout that changed his life, especially once Romantic Homicide took off and turned him into the kind of artist whose online footprint would later be examined by millions of strangers. Fame widened the spotlight. It also froze years of old material in place, ready to be replayed under a harsher lens the moment his name entered a criminal investigation. ABC 7 Los Angeles, https://abc7com/post/ is D4vd singer arrested death-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez started video game streamer // By early 2024, Celeste had already become the subject of missing person concern. Public reporting says her family reported her missing in February 2024 and again later that spring. ABC7's reporting on the case timeline says investigators found David's number in connection with the earlier disappearance, and NBC Los Angeles reported that Celeste's family was aware she knew him. That part of the story is one reason people keep asking the same agonizing question: how many warning signs were there, and who understood what those signs meant at the time? It is a painful question because it does not just point at one person. It points at a network of adults, institutions, and systems that may or may not have recognized the danger soon enough. ABC7 Los Angeles, https://abc7.com/singer-d4vd-charge-murder-timeline-investigation-death-1/4-year-old/Celeste-Rivas-Hernandez/1890812 NBC Los Angeles. https://www.nbclosangeles.com/investigations/d4vd-celeste-rivas-murder-court-date-status-conference/3905414. Then comes the date prosecutors now place at the center of everything, April 23, 2025. According to the prosecution, Celeste traveled to David's Hollywood Hills residence that day after an argument described in text messages the night before. Prosecutors allege Celeste had become extremely upset and threatened to expose information about the relationship they say existed between them. They argue David's career was under threat, that Celeste was a key witness in an investigation related to that relationship, and that those pressures formed part of the motive. In court filings summarized by ABC7 and NBC Los Angeles, prosecutors allege David sent an Uber to bring Celeste to his home and then texted her asking where she was after the ride had already dropped her off, which they claim was part of a premeditated cover-up because she was already dead by then. David's attorneys reject the murder allegation and say the evidence will prove he did not kill her. ABC7 Los Angeles, https://abc7.com/singer-d4vd-do-back-court-killing-1/4-year-old/Celeste-Rivas-Hernandez/194637768, NBC Los Angeles. https://www.nbclosangeles.com/investigations/d4vd-celeste-rivas-murder-court-date-status-conference/3905414. What prosecutors describe next is why this case has shocked even people used to ugly celebrity scandals. They allege that very soon after Celeste arrived, David stabbed her multiple times and stood by as she bled out, without calling law enforcement or seeking medical help. They further allege that in the days that followed he purchased tools used to dismember and conceal her body, including a shovel, chainsaws, a body bag, heavy-duty bags, and an inflatable pool delivered under a fake name. Prosecutors say biological evidence, cuts in the pool, and blood samples found in the garage support that theory. They also allege one of Celeste's fingers was removed because it bore a tattoo of David's name. These are prosecution allegations, not proven facts, but they are among the most disturbing claims that will hang over the July hearing. ABC7 Los Angeles, https://abc7.com/post/singer-d4vd-do-back-court-killing-1/4-year-old/Celeste-Rivas-Hernandez/194637768. And this is where the timeline becomes almost impossible for many people to process. Prosecutors allege that after Celeste died in April 2025, David continued moving through public life. ABC7's timeline says he released his debut studio album, Withered, on April 25, 2025, just 2 days after the date prosecutors believe Celeste was killed. They further allege that on May 1 he ordered chainsaws and on May 5 ordered a body bag, and that her body was mutilated that same day. Then, months later, on September 8, 2025, workers at a Hollywood tow yard reported a foul odor coming from a Tesla registered to David. Inside the front trunk, officers found human remains later identified as Celeste on September 16. For many people following the case, that gap between the alleged killing and the later discovery is the detail that keeps the entire story from feeling real. ABC7 Los Angeles, https://abc7.com/post/singer-d4vd-charged-murder-timeline-investigation-death-144-year-old/celeste-rivas-hernandez/1890812 NBC Los Angeles, https://www.nbclosangeles.com/investigations/D4vd-celeste-rivas-murder-court-date-status-conference/3905414 NBC Los Angeles reported that the Tesla had been impounded after someone said it appeared abandoned in the Hollywood Hills, where neighbors claimed it had been parked for more than a month. ABC7's later court coverage says surveillance video and other evidence allegedly show David was the last person to drive the vehicle on July 29, 2025, before leaving Los Angeles for a concert tour. That allegation matters because it stretches the prosecution's narrative far beyond a single violent act. It suggests not only concealment, but the possibility of an ordinary public schedule continuing in parallel with something prosecutors say was horrific. If that is what the evidence ultimately shows, it will become one of the most devastating contrasts in the entire case. If it does not, the defense will attack that contrast with everything it has. NBC Los Angeles, https://www.nbclosangeles.com/investigations/D4vd-celeste-rivas-court-date-status-conference/3905414 ABC7 Los Angeles, https://abc7.com/post/singer-d4vd-back-court-killing-144-year-old/celeste-rivas-hernandez/194637768. David was arrested on April 16, 2026. 4 days later, he was formally charged. Public reporting says the murder count carries special circumstance allegations including lying in wait, financial gain, and killing a witness in a criminal investigation. Prosecutors have argued that the alleged financial gain stems from David trying to protect a lucrative career threatened by the exposure of the relationship they say existed. They have also said Celeste was considered a key witness, which is why the witness murder theory appears in the case. Possible penalties, if he were convicted as charged, could include life without parole or even the death penalty, though prosecutors had not yet made a final public decision on seeking death as of the reporting reviewed here. David has pleaded not guilty. ABC7 Los Angeles, https://abc7.com/post/singer-d4vd-back-court-killing-144-year-old/celeste-rivas-hernandez/194637768, NBC Los Angeles, https://www.nbclosangeles.com/investigations/D4vd-celeste-rivas-murder-court-date-status-conference/3905414. So what exactly happens on July 21, 2026? ABC7 and NBC both describe it as a multi-day preliminary hearing expected to determine whether prosecutors have shown enough evidence for the case to proceed to trial. That does not mean guilt or innocence will be decided then. It means the court will examine whether the state's evidence clears the threshold required to keep moving forward. In practical terms, it could become the first major public test of the prosecution's theory, the defense response, and the strength of the investigative record. That is why the date matters so much. Not because it ends the story, but because it may be the first time the public gets a more structured view of the evidence behind the headlines. ABC7 Los Angeles, https://abc7.com/post/singer-d4vd-back-court-killing-144-year-old/celeste-rivas-hernandez/194637768, NBC Los Angeles, https://www.nbclosangeles.com/investigations/D4vd-celeste-rivas-murder-court-date-status-conference/3905414. There is another detail that keeps showing up in reporting and online discussion: the scale of the evidence. Public coverage has cited enormous discovery volume, with reporting and courtroom discussion indicating prosecutors assembled tens of terabytes of material. That volume matters for two opposite reasons. On one hand, people hear a number like that and assume the case must be overwhelming. On the other hand, massive discovery can also mean the defense has many angles to challenge interpretation, context, authentication, and chain of custody. A huge file is not the same thing as a simple case. Sometimes it is the opposite. Sometimes it means the story is going to become even more technical, more contested, and more emotionally draining once the court starts sorting through it piece by piece. NBC Los Angeles, https://www.nbclosangeles.com/investigation/D4vd-celeste-rivas-murder-court-date-stat-conference/3905414, U.S. News via AP, https://www.usnews.com/news/entertainment/articles/singer DVD's lawyers look to make evidence against him public in killing of year-old girl. That is where the internet has complicated this case. The courtroom has one job. The internet has another. Online, people began pulling at every thread they could find: old interviews, lyrics, visual motifs, live stream moments, reposts, fan clips, gaming history, Discord stories, and alleged account archives. Some of that material may prove meaningful later. Some of it may turn out to be irrelevant. Some of it may be fabricated outright. That tension has created a second battle running alongside the legal one. People do not just want to know what happened. They want to know whether the signs were visible long before the arrest, and whether the public missed a pattern that now looks obvious only in hindsight. That question becomes especially intense when people revisit David's own artistic language. Long before this case, he openly discussed fictional personas and dark themes. In one widely circulated interview segment, he described an alter ego concept involving a detective solving crimes committed by another version of himself. In context, he presented it as creative fiction shaped by anime, storytelling, and character building. After his arrest, those clips spread everywhere as viewers tried to decide whether they were just dramatic art school mythology or something more revealing. That kind of retrospective analysis is emotionally powerful, but it is also dangerous. Art can sound sinister in hindsight even when it had no criminal meaning at the time. The legal system will not convict someone for having a dark imagination. It will have to test evidence connected to real acts, real dates, real communications, and real forensic findings. The same caution applies to social media. Since David's arrest, commenters have analyzed old reposts about jealousy, possessiveness, control, emotional volatility, and obsession. Others have focused on lyrics, stage visuals, merchandise, and performances that now seem eerie given the allegations. Public interest in those details is understandable. People look for coherence when a story shocks them. They want the ending to have been visible at the beginning. But reposts and aesthetics do not prove homicide. At most, they help explain why the public has become so convinced that every corner of David's image deserves a second look. They are context, not verdict. There is also the broader issue of online contact between adults, teenagers, and young fan communities. According to the prosecution's timeline, David and Celeste first connected in 2022, when she was 11. Some online accounts claim they were present in gaming lobbies or Discord environments where the two interacted. Those claims remain unverified unless authenticated through the legal process. Even so, they point toward a larger modern fear: how easily relationships can form in digital spaces that seem casual, playful, or invisible to the adults who think a child is merely gaming with friends. This case has forced many viewers to confront the distance between what a family might imagine is happening online and what may actually be happening there. The questions surrounding Celeste's family have become another flashpoint. Public reporting has described varying statements from relatives about whether they knew she had a boyfriend named David, how much contact they believed she had with him, and when they last saw her. Online commentary has seized on those differences and turned them into accusations, but the truth may be messier than a comment section wants to admit. Families in crisis often speak from incomplete knowledge. People remember events differently. Some relatives may know more than others. Some may be protecting themselves from blame. Some may simply be grieving. None of that erases the public's questions, especially when a child vanished more than once. But it does mean caution matters before turning uncertainty into certainty. Another layer involves the adults around David. NBC reported that his family members in Texas were drawn into grand jury-related proceedings earlier in 2026, though prosecutors declined to discuss what occurred because of grand jury secrecy. That detail added fuel to the perception that the investigation was sprawling well beyond one suspect and one crime scene. NBC also reported that law enforcement sources had previously indicated more than one person may have been involved in Celeste's death or the attempted disposal of her body, though that reporting does not itself establish criminal responsibility for anyone else. It does, however, explain why the public keeps wondering whether this story is still much larger than the charging documents already filed. NBC Los Angeles, https://www.nbclosangeles.com/investigation/D4vd-celeste-rivas-murder-court-date-status-conference/3905414. And then there is the issue of digital evidence reportedly found on David's devices. ABC 7 reported prosecutors told a court that a significant amount of child sexual abuse material was found on a phone belonging to him. Prosecutors have also alleged text exchanges referencing sex, pregnancy, abortion, and emergency contraception, as well as explicit photographs they say documented the relationship. Those are serious allegations, and if authenticated, they could be among the most powerful components of the state's case. They could also become the focus of major pretrial fights over admissibility, prejudice, and what jurors are ultimately allowed to see. Again, David's attorneys say the actual evidence will show he did not murder Celeste. The coming hearings may reveal how they plan to confront the prosecution's digital narrative. ABC 7 Los Angeles, https://abc7com/post/dvd Celeste Rivas Hernandez murder case updates hearing singer set autopsy report released // ABC 7 Los Angeles, https://abc7.com/post/singer-d4vd-do-back-court-killing-144-year-old/celeste-rivas-hernandez/194637768. One reason this case has struck such a nerve is that it feels like several American anxieties crashing together at once. Celebrity culture. Online adolescence. Missing child systems. The fragility of parental oversight in digital life. The tendency of fame to hide behavior that would draw scrutiny in any ordinary setting. And the way audiences now perform their own investigations in real time, turning every archived clip into potential evidence. People are not just following a case. They are trying to decode an era. That is why the public discourse keeps circling back to the same unbearable thought. If prosecutors are right, then the warning signs were not hidden in some sealed vault. They were scattered across missing person reports, digital trails, private communications, a highly public career, and an adult world that may have failed to act decisively enough. If the defense is right, then one of the most shocking narratives on the internet has raced ahead of what the evidence can actually support. Either way, the stakes are enormous, because the emotional certainty of the public and the proof demanded by a courtroom are not the same thing. There is also a reason this story has generated such intense scrutiny of language. David's name, his song titles, his persona, his old clips, even the symbolism in his visuals have all become objects of interpretation. But the real battleground is much less poetic. It is going to come down to records, timestamps, devices, travel, purchases, forensic findings, witness accounts, and whether prosecutors can connect those pieces into a narrative strong enough to survive defense attack. People on the internet may feel they already know what happened. The court does not work that way. It will ask what can be shown, what can be authenticated, and what can be challenged. That distinction matters because cases like this often produce a flood of confident claims that collapse the moment they touch procedure. An alleged screenshot is not automatically evidence. A rumor from a former moderator is not automatically reliable. A viral theory that sounds persuasive on TikTok can still be useless in a courtroom. At the same time, a quiet filing or a dry line in a prosecutor's brief can matter more than weeks of speculation. The public often gravitates to the most dramatic detail. The law often turns on the most documentable one. As July 21st approaches, 3 questions appear larger than the rest. First, how much of the prosecution's timeline will be backed by hard forensic support rather than interpretation? Second, how will the defense explain the physical and digital evidence already described in open reporting? And third, will the hearing reveal whether this case is narrower than the internet believes, or wider than the public has even understood so far? Those questions are why this story keeps pulling people back in. Not because it is celebrity gossip. Not anymore. At this point it is a case study in the collision between public persona and criminal allegation, between internet culture and courtroom standards, between what people feel must be true and what can actually be proved. Celeste Rivas Hernandez is no longer just the subject of a missing person flyer. She is at the center of a prosecution that could end one young artist's career and define how a vast audience remembers every interview, lyric, and public image that came before. And maybe that is the hardest part to sit with. Before this became a murder case, Celeste was a real 14-year-old girl with a family, a community, and a future that should have stretched much farther than this story now allows. It is easy for the internet to reduce a tragedy to clues, screenshots, theories, and timelines. It is harder, and more necessary, to remember what those timelines are actually measuring, the distance between a child being alive and a child never coming home. So now the case moves into the next phase. Prosecutors will try to show that the story they have told is not just horrifying, but provable. David's defense will try to show that the public has been swept up by a narrative stronger than the facts. And everyone watching will learn whether the evidence presented in court matches the immense weight of the allegations already circulating outside it. If you are following this case, the question is no longer whether the story is shocking. The question is which part of the record will matter most once the hearing begins. The alleged relationship timeline. The digital evidence. The purchases prosecutors say point to concealment. The months between April and September. Or the possibility that warning signs were visible long before the arrest. Because one way or another, that is where the next chapter begins.